A few seconds of your support can make a huge difference. Subscribe and join us for more powerful stories of betrayal, secrets, and revenge. Now, let's begin. I signed those papers on a Friday in early April. The attorney's conference room smelled like burnt coffee and carpet cleaner. My soon-to-be ex-wife, Isabel, sat across from me in a blazer that probably cost more than my monthly rent used to be. Her lawyer, a guy named Preston with a watch worth more than my car, kept sliding documents toward me with this quiet, satisfied look on his face. She got the condo we'd rented for 5 years. The landlord had already agreed to switch the lease into her name. She took the Subaru we'd bought together 2 years earlier. I kept the old pickup with 190,000 miles that needed a jump on cold mornings. She got most of the joint savings. I kept my personal account with just over $600 in it. None of that compared to what she said when Preston handed me the last page. She leaned in close, voice low enough that only I could hear it. You know what's funny? I actually feel sorry for you. You're going to end up broke and alone, and nobody's going to remember you existed. You were never going to be anything. I'm doing myself a favor, getting out before I waste any more of my life on someone this small. I didn't say anything. I signed where Preston pointed. He looked uncomfortable for half a second, then went back to his folder. I walked out of that office holding a stack of paper, proving I'd lost almost everything in under an hour. 3 months later, I was hauling pallets at a regional distribution center on the edge of town. Overnight shift, $11 an hour. The kind of place where nobody bothers learning your name because the turnover never stops. I'd clock in at 10, move freight for 8 hours, clock out at 6, drive home with my back screaming and my hands cut up from cardboard and shrink wrap. I rented a room from a woman named Yvonne. $80 a week, shared bathroom, a mini fridge, and a microwave I'd picked up secondhand. The room barely fit a mattress and a desk I'd dragged off someone's curb, but it was mine, and nobody could take it from me. And some nights that was the only thing that got me through a shift. I never told anyone at the warehouse about the divorce. What was there to say? That my wife of 6 years decided I wasn't worth the effort? Found someone better at the firm she worked for, and made sure to take everything not nailed down on her way out? Truth is, I wasn't even angry anymore by that point. Just tired. Tired of replaying her voice in my head. Tired of wondering what I should have done differently. My supervisor, a heavyset guy named Hank with a permanent scowl, only cared whether trucks left on schedule. If you did your job, he left you alone, and I appreciated that more than he probably realized. It happened on a Wednesday night, almost 4 months after the divorce closed. I was stacking a shipment near the loading dock, mentally doing math on whether I had enough for groceries that week, when I heard someone call my full name, not just my first name, but both names. The way someone says it when they actually knew you from a life before all of this. I turned around. The man walking toward me looked completely out of place. Pressed shirt, no tie, dark hair going gray at the temples, somewhere around my age. He stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets, smiling. Not pity, not smugness, just something genuine. "Took me almost a month to find you," he said. "You're not easy to track down when you don't want to be found." I set my box down. My brain was still catching up. Then it clicked. The voice, the way he stood, the small scar above his eyebrow from the night we dropped a server rack on each other back in college. "Theo," I said. He nodded. "Been a while." Theo Marsh. My old business partner from a life I'd basically buried, back when I was 24, and naive enough to think 2 guys living on instant noodles could build something that mattered, before I walked away from all of it for a stable paycheck and a regular life, and a marriage that eventually decided regular wasn't enough. "What are you doing here?" I asked. My voice sounded strange. I hadn't held a real conversation in weeks. He glanced around the warehouse, then back at me. "We need to talk. You got time for coffee after your shift?" I had no idea what he could possibly want after 12 years of silence. But something in his face told me this wasn't casual. This was something that had made him track me down to a warehouse loading dock at 4 in the morning. "Yeah," I said. "I'm off in 2 hours. There's a diner 3 blocks south. I'll be there." He turned and walked toward the exit, leaving me standing there with a half-stacked pallet and more questions than I'd had in 4 months. Hank rounded the corner a minute later, clipboard in hand. "You on break?" "No," I said, grabbing the next box. "Just finishing up." But my hands weren't steady anymore, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than exhaustion. I felt awake. The diner looked the same at 4 in the morning as it probably did at 4 in the afternoon. Worn booths, checkered tile, a rotating case of pie nobody seemed to be buying. Theo was already in a corner booth with 2 coffees waiting when I walked in, still in my warehouse uniform, smelling like cardboard and sweat. He didn't seem to notice. "You look different," he said. 12 years does that." He smiled slightly. "That's not what I meant. You look like you've been through something." I picked up the coffee. Bitter, burnt, exactly what I expected. "Why are you here, Theo? How'd you even find me?" "Private investigator. Cost me about $1,500, but it was worth it." He pulled a folder from his bag and set it on the table between us. "I need to show you something, and I need you to actually hear me out before you decide I've lost my mind." I stared at the folder. "Okay. You remember the inventory platform we were building in 2012, before you left?" I almost laughed. "Theo, that was forever ago. We never even launched it. The whole thing fell apart 6 months after I quit. You left because you needed something stable. I never blamed you for that." He paused. "But I kept working on it, improved the core architecture, found a couple of investors who actually believed in it. Small money at first, but enough to keep going." "That's great, man, genuinely. But what does it have to do with me?" He opened the folder. Inside were legal documents, incorporation papers, dense pages with sections highlighted in yellow. He turned it so I could read. "When we formed the company, we filed it as a partnership. You owned 35%. I owned 35%. Our third investor, Walt Driscoll, you remember him, held the rest. You never signed anything giving up your shares. You just stopped showing up. And I never pushed you to formalize an exit, because some part of me figured I might need to find you again someday." I set my cup down. "Why would you do that?" "Because we built the foundation together. 18-hour days in that apartment with a window unit that barely worked. You wrote half the original code. Walking away doesn't erase what you put into it." My head was spinning. "Did you sell the company? Is this some kind of buyout?" He leaned back, and for the first time I noticed how tired he looked, like he'd been carrying this for a while. 3 weeks ago, a logistics software company called Brennick Systems closed an acquisition deal for the platform. They wanted it for the supply chain integration. It does something nobody else's software can replicate yet. Something cold settled in my stomach. "How much?" $9.2 million. The diner suddenly felt very small. Somewhere behind the counter, a dish clattered. A truck rumbled past on the road outside. "Your share, after taxes and legal fees," Theo said quietly, "comes to just under 3.3 million. I couldn't speak. I just sat there, waiting for him to laugh, to tell me this was some kind of joke. He didn't laugh. He just slid the folder closer. "It's all documented. The trust paperwork, the acquisition agreement. There's a lawyer waiting to talk you through it. Her name's Priya Anand. She's good. She'll explain everything." "This isn't possible," I finally said. "I load boxes for $11 an hour. I rent a room with a shared bathroom. I just went through a divorce that took almost everything I had. And you're telling me I'm a millionaire?" "Yes." "Why now? Why wait this long to find me?" Theo looked down at his coffee. "I tried once, about 5 years ago. Found you living a few states over, married, working a normal job. You looked stable. I didn't want to blow that up over a deal that hadn't even closed yet. The shares were safe in the trust either way. I figured I'd wait until there was something real to hand you." He paused. "When I went looking again recently, your old address was gone. No forwarding info, no working number. So I dug a little deeper and found out about the divorce, and figured I'd waited long enough." I picked up one of the documents. My name was right there in the legal language, attached to numbers that didn't connect to anything in my current life. "What about my ex-wife?" The question came out before I could stop it. "Can she claim any of this?" Theo shook his head. "Already checked with Priya. The trust predates your marriage, and the divorce paperwork has a standard clause where Isabel waived rights to any prior business interests. Her attorney probably treated it as boilerplate, had no idea there was anything attached to it." I almost laughed. She'd spent that entire conference room fight over a condo lease and a used Subaru, and her own lawyer had missed the only thing that actually mattered. "So, she gets nothing." "Correct. This is entirely yours." I sat there holding that page for a long time, trying to make it connect to the man who'd been hauling pallets 2 hours earlier, the man whose ex-wife had told him to his face that he'd die broke and forgotten. "I don't know what to say," I admitted. Theo smiled. "Don't say anything yet. Just don't go back to that warehouse tonight. Come meet Priya. Start figuring out what you actually want your life to look like now that you've got options." I looked down at my hands, cut up, calloused, the hands of someone who'd been doing manual labor for months straight. In a few hours, I was supposed to go back to my rented room, sleep, and do it all again. Instead, I stood up. "Okay, let's go meet your lawyer." Priya Anand's office sat on the 8th floor of a mid-rise downtown. Professional, not flashy. The kind of space that said successful without trying to intimidate anyone. She was somewhere in her 50s, sharp eyes behind thin glasses, a handshake that didn't waste time. "I've been looking forward to meeting you," she said, once we'd settled into her conference room. Theo had driven us straight there from the diner. I was still in my warehouse clothes, painfully aware of how out of place I looked against the mahogany and framed diplomas. She laid everything out, the original incorporation papers from 2012, the trust Theo had set up 2 years later, the acquisition agreement that had closed 3 weeks earlier, bank statements showing the money sitting in escrow, waiting on me. "This is real?" I asked, probably for the 5th time. "Completely. I verified every page myself. The IRS has already been notified. Taxes are accounted for. Once you give us updated banking details and sign the transfer authorization, the funds land in your account within 3 business days." I looked over at Theo. He'd known all of this for weeks, maybe longer, while I'd been stacking pallets and eating gas station dinners. "Why did you actually do this?" I asked him. "You could have claimed my shares were abandoned, restructured the whole thing. Nobody would have blinked." He was quiet for a moment. "My uncle worked the same plant floor for 26 years. They cut his position with 2 weeks' notice and a handshake. No severance, no pension. He never really recovered from that. Not financially, not as a person. I watched what it did to him." He leaned forward. "When we started that company, we were equal partners. You wrote half that code base. The fact that you had to leave for something stable doesn't erase what you put into it. I wasn't going to be the kind of person who decides loyalty only counts when it's convenient." Something tightened in my chest. 4 months earlier, I'd believed nobody on earth cared whether I made it through the week. And here was a man telling me he'd spent over a decade quietly protecting something I didn't even know I still owned. I spent the next 2 hours reading every page. Priya explained things in plain language. Theo filled in the gaps about the company, the deal, everything that had happened since I'd walked out the door all those years ago. It felt unreal, sitting in that office learning the shape of an entire chapter of my own life I'd missed completely. Eventually, I signed everything. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you wait 3 days," Priya said, "and then you figure out what kind of life you actually want." Theo drove me back to my rented room. Neither of us said much. What was there left to say? My entire world had reorganized itself in the space of one morning. When he dropped me off, he said, "Call me if you need anything. Advice, references, whatever. You don't have to figure this out by yourself." "Thank you," I said, "for not forgetting me." "You were never forgotten," he said simply, and drove off. I sat on the edge of my mattress that night, listening to the mini fridge hum and Yvonne's TV murmuring through the wall. Everything in that room was exactly the same as it had been 12 hours earlier. Nothing about it felt the same at all. I didn't quit the warehouse right away. I needed time to plan. I'd just spent 4 months learning what it felt like to have nothing, and I wasn't about to swing straight into recklessness with everything either. I called in sick for 3 days while the transfer processed. When the number finally landed in my account, I stared at it for a long time, like it belonged to someone else. $3.3 million. I opened a fresh checking account at a different bank, kept the rest in a high-yield savings account until I could meet with a financial advisor. I'd read enough stories about windfalls disappearing in 5 years to know exactly what not to do. On day 4, I went back to the warehouse. Hank looked surprised to see me. "Thought you'd quit." Needed a few days, I'm back. I worked 2 more weeks, full shifts, kept my head down. During that time, I met with an advisor Priya recommended, set up investments, talked to a tax attorney, made sure every dollar had a place to go. I bought a modest house, 3 bedrooms, decent neighborhood, paid in cash. I bought a reliable used truck, paid in cash for that too. I built 6 months of expenses into checking and let the rest sit, invested conservatively. I wasn't trying to get richer. I was trying to stay steady. On my last day, Hank pulled me aside. Putting in notice? Found something else. He just nodded. You were reliable. That counts. I clocked out for the last time as the sun came up, sat in my truck in the lot for a minute, looking at the building that had been my entire world for 4 months. I didn't regret any of it. It had taught me I could lose nearly everything and still get up the next morning. That was worth knowing, but I was done surviving. It was time to actually build something. I drove to my new house, still mostly empty. A mattress and a few boxes I'd been slowly moving over from Yvonne's place. She'd been genuinely happy for me when I told her I'd found better work. I gave her an extra $200 on my way out. She tried to refuse it. I insisted. I stood in the empty living room in the early light and felt something I hadn't